Okay, welcome to our very last unit. It's on sociolinguistics, which is the most fascinating part. It is the best part of the whole course, which is a good thing because for me it's a dark, rainy, gloomy, cold day and I'm catching a cold or something, and I'm wearing my old favorite sweatshirt. But it's a lot of fun, so it doesn't matter. All that doesn't matter because this is the best. This is the best stuff. Now, up until now, we've been talking about the structural building blocks of language, the internal structure of language, and we've had these divisions from the smallest unit of the language to the largest, from the phoneme up to the discourse level. The phoneme, remember, just a sound, doesn't or a signal, doesn't have any meaning until you put it with another phoneme, and then it becomes a morpheme, which does have meaning but may not stand alone as a word, but it may stand alone as a word. But sometimes you can string a bunch of morphemes together, and that is a word. And then you take a bunch of words, lexical items, string those together to form syntax. You got a full sentence. You take a bunch of sentences, and before you know it, you got a whole unit of discourse, right? But it's been sort of a false division between those units, those building blocks, and we've noticed it along the way a little bit. But it's the way linguists talk about language and teach about language. But we've noticed that there are things like phonomorphology. This phoneme really does stand alone as having meaning. It's a plural or a possessive, right? Oh, so suddenly we have some sort of overlap between the levels. Or a morpheme can stand alone as a lexical item. So it's both a morpheme and a lexical item, so there's overlap there. Or one sentence can really be an entire unit of discourse. Like, go do the dishes. Done. You know what I mean? So we sort of force these divisions in order to teach and talk about language. But now we're talking about the external structure of language, and that is the outside external influences like the context that we talked about last week has on language. So pragmatically speaking, you can say something like, I'll take the kids and leave you alone. Okay, well, does that mean that it's Saturday and your husband wants to get some stuff done around the house or just plain relax or whatever, so you're going to take the kids, go to the mall, go to the park, spend the day away so that he has some alone time? Or does it mean that is it, that is the last straw, we are out of here, I want a divorce and I'm taking the kids with me? Which you don't, so it always depends upon the context, right? And this week, we're talking about how all kinds of social factors influence the way we use language, and why different people speak different ways, and why in one country they'll speak a couple of different languages, but the country calls them the same language, although these people can't even hold a conversation, while in other countries they recognize a dozen different languages being spoken. And while other countries like ours keeps trying to push for one unified, one way to speak. And all that kind of stuff is all part of the field of sociolinguistics. But there's a lot in sociolinguistics we're not going to look at. For instance, one of the things that we're not going to cover is really important, and that is the link between language and culture. We just don't have time to go that much into depth about it and really go into the anthropological aspects of language. We also aren't going to talk about the way your brain works while it's processing language, which isn't really strictly a sociolinguistic aspect. It's a cognitive linguistic aspect. But we're not going to get to go into those things. We're also going to have very limited discussion later on about language acquisition, which is really a big deal, and I wish we had more time to spend on it. What we are going to cover, the authors list 5 ways of looking at sociolinguistics. We're talking about language policy and planning, and people's attitudes toward language, what happens when languages come into contact with each other, the basic premise that there is social interaction with language. But what it all boils down to is language variation. All of those things cause each individual person to use language in their own individual way. And it's interesting that they list those 5 categories, but then they don't organize their own book by using those categories. But I'm going to follow those categories in our worksheet in our lecture, and and I'm going to start right away with language variation because it all boils down to language variation. And in fact, I have to say that C.L. Lucas, one of the authors of this book, is the world-renowned, the preeminent expert on sociolinguistics and American Sign Language. She's one of the best teachers I ever had, love her to death, but I would rewrite her book. And in fact, my master's thesis was basically absolutely a project on a dialect of American Sign Language, where 2 deaf people who have grown up with American Sign Language and now are grown and now become blind as well, typically because of ushers, and now they communicate like this. So I studied how their phonology varies from the standard ASL, how their morphology varies, how their lexical items change, how their syntactic structures have to be different. They don't have non-manual signals, and how even their discourse markers are completely different. Means, yep, I'm getting you, go ahead. Those kinds of things. So my entire project was a sociolinguistic project.